For this trip, Chloe and I were heading to the New River Gorge in West Virginia. For day one, we were heading south towards the city of Columbus, Ohio, where we spent the day checking out the city. We capped it off with a visit to the Book Loft, which is a huge bookstore with over 30 rooms of books. You could just absolutely get lost in there. Here we go, crossing the mighty Ohio River from Ohio into West Virginia early in the morning on day two. We were cruising along Highway 60 next to the Kanawha River on our way to check out our first waterfall, which is the Kanawha Falls. This is a huge waterfall spanning across the entire body of water, which is the confluence of the New and the Gully rivers, which is just above the falls there. Our next stop was located just up the road, called Cathedral Falls, aptly named for being tucked at the very back of a short little canyon, which really makes you feel secluded out of the landscape as if you're in a cathedral. We are here extremely late in the season, so the water was not running very fast, but I imagine this is a beautiful sight with a roaring stream. After leaving the falls, we were crossing the Gully River and the Gully Bridge, and we were on our way to the New River Gorge National Park, which is home to an even larger bridge, which we were seeing for the first time here. The New River Gorge Bridge is a steel arch bridge spanning 3,000 feet across the New River Gorge below, with a single steel arch that spans 1,700 feet across. It is the fifth largest single steel arch bridge in the world at the moment. At the end of this bridge, heading east, there is a visitor center where we pulled over to catch our first glimpses of the river and the gorge below, which were absolutely stunning. And inside, they have a wonderful topographical map of the river running through the region, and you can really see how deep the gorge is in perspective to the land around, and just how stunning this whole national park is and how great these views are. And speaking of this mighty gorge, be prepared to hike up and down a lot of steps to take in a lot of these views around here. And after soaking in the sights here at the Canyon Rim Visitor Center, we were back on the road heading south towards our camp for the night, which was going to be a campsite called Stone Cliff, located right along the banks of the river. The ranger at the visitor center had warned us that the campground at Stone Cliff was pretty sandy, but it was quite all right with us. Being from Michigan, we're quite used to staying in that kind of environment. We found the spot to be a really, really cozy, comfy campground to spend a couple of nights down in the New River. What we enjoyed the most about the spot was its great location right next to the historic ghost town of Thurmond, West Virginia. This little ghost town packs quite a mighty history lesson, so if you're planning a visit here, I recommend trying to learn yourself a little bit on the history of the town before you coming here, because there's a lot to see, and it'll really make your stop even more special, in my opinion. The town of Thurmond, West Virginia was incorporated in the early 1900s and was quite a bustling coal mining community at that time. Here we're looking down the main street, which actually didn't have a road running through it, but was actually built right up on the railroad tracks, which served as the lifeblood of this community at the time. Thurmond was home to many businesses. They had multiple banks. Here we are looking at the National Bank of Thurmond. The railroad tracks are still very much active today. Here's an Amtrak train that had just dropped passengers off in Thurmond. It's an active passenger train stop to this very day. And of course, everywhere you look through the town, As you continue along the railroad tracks here, you just continue to see evidence of the boom in coal mining industry that was so prevalent in this part of the country during the heyday of this town. Is that rocking chair moving? When the sun set, the darkness descended around us very quickly. We decided to finish our walk around the block here in the ghost town of Thurmond, and it got quite spooky in that place once everything was dark. And even though Thurmond became a town in 1900 and the main street and the buildings that were built there were soon to follow, it did not become a ghost town until around the 1950s. And for this reason, many of the houses are still from this time period up here on the hill. And it is also worth mentioning that even though much of this town is abandoned and it is technically called a ghost town, there are still like 5 or 6 people that do live here, so please be respectful if you're walking around shining the light around the place. As we approached the end of the road, we saw peeking through the trees the Thurmond Union Church, one of the churches in the community that served the religious needs of the people in the area and a lot of the coal mining camps. As we gazed down the completely darkened hillside at one of the never-ending coal trains going by in the night, we decided that we were spooked enough and that we should probably head back to camp and call it a night. And when we woke up in the morning, we found ourselves trapped in the tent in a pretty moderately sized rainstorm. We had no other choice but to just sit and wait it out, which wasn't too bad. It was rather relaxing and quite enjoyable. We made the most of it. At the first break in the weather, we packed up our campsite real nice and ran for the car. And shortly down the road, we spotted a waterfall, and we do not often pass waterfalls, so of course we were down checking it out. And sure enough, as we're down there exploring the quintessential West Virginia moment, a waterfall and a coal train. What a shot. This dreary and drizzly morning on this new day left us with a totally new perspective from the bridge, yet another totally different personality of the New River Gorge. Today we are back at the Canyon Rim Visitor Center, and we're going to take the one-way road down the canyon and over the old bridge and check out the larger New River Gorge Bridge from the bottom. This was a really cool scenic road with a number of pull-offs that you can get views of the bridge and the river from. It didn't take too long and doesn't take you too far out of the way, so if you are passing through this area and want to check out the New River Gorge really fast, this is a good way to get your toes wet, as they say, and get your first glimpses. From this perspective, we are just about where the steel arch is anchored into the wall of the gorge itself, and you can really start to get a feel of just how massive this structure actually is. As we continued our descent to the river's edge, we were continually thinking about how just by happenstance we were here on what would have been the annual Bridge Day celebration, an event that was canceled for health concerns. An event where people travel from far and wide to celebrate the massive bridge by, ironically, jumping off from way up there and base jumping down to the bottom. I suppose I'm not really sure if I'm more bummed to miss the base jumpers or if I was actually more excited to have the place to ourselves and be able to take in all of the sights and fall colors without mobs of people all around us. After soaking in our final views of the underside of the bridge here, we were back in the car heading to the top of the gorge where we needed to find a place to refuel. And we stumbled across the Biscuit World, which is a wild and wonderful West Virginia breakfast, I guess. And we needed every calorie because we were heading down to the Kaymoor 1 mine trail. The Kaymoor mine site is located just down the road from the Canyon Rim Visitor Center towards the town of Fayetteville. During our time here, the more moderate Kaymoor Trail, which kind of winds down this slope at a more steady grade, was actually out for repairs. So we ended up on the Kaymoor Miners Trail, which is a much more strenuous, steep trail that kind of goes straight down the wall of the gorge. We followed the slick switchback trail here that snaked its way down the beginning portion of the gorge to the site of the mine itself, which sits on a shelf about halfway up the gorge wall. Peering through the trees and foliage, you see evidence of the mine and the mining operation that was prevalent here many years ago. A rusty old sign that says, "Your family wants you to work safely," leaves an ominous message as you enter the area where the mine itself existed, as coal mining was pretty notoriously dangerous in the late 1800s and early 1900s. It would have been a pretty tough profession to make your money, as you can see as you hike this trail and read the signage and take in the history of this place. It's quite an amazing sight to see. The mine bench level consisted of the remnants of a number of old buildings where we saw this really cool millipede, as well as a number of different mine shaft openings and ventilation shafts, which were all boarded up for safety reasons, of course. And from there, you take the 821 steps down to the Kaymoor town, which is where the freshly mined coal would go down and be processed and put onto trains, where these trains would then take the coal and run it through the New River Gorge, through towns like Thurmond and others like it, and it would go all over the country to different places in the United States. Here you can see the actual chute system through the trees there that would actually run coal down to the bottom. And our legs were absolutely feeling that every single one of those 821 steps by the bottom. Right away, we're surrounded by evidence of the massive coal mining operation that existed here once upon a time. A lot of buildings still standing through the trees. Some of them are pretty much toppled over sideways, but we just started exploring around and enjoying every second of it. Here we could see some really old toppled over equipment used sometime in the coal making process. I assume they were dumping it into the train cars from there, and there's plenty of evidence of that from all the lumps of coal we were finding on the ground. It was really quite incredible to walk around here and see some of the old machinery and equipment, and to look inside some of these old buildings and really immerse yourself in the history and the time, and just imagining what this place was like 100 years ago when all this was still standing. It remains absolutely incredible to me when I think back about the timeline it took to find a resource in these hills, build a mine, have huge camps of people that came from all over to work in these mines that turned into little cities, incorporated towns all along the railroads. And here we are 100 years later, and it's all toppled over, being taken back by nature. It's absolutely amazing to me. Here we see the ultimate example of nature finding a way, as this tree just grew through the building, bending its way up and out the window to find the sun. Here's some more old mining equipment and some more old standing structures. As we finished up our visit down here at the Kaymoor mine, we were absolutely dreading heading back up all those stairs, back up to the top level where our car was waiting for us. So we ended up spending as much time as we could down here, probably a little bit extra, just taking pictures of all the old equipment and exploring every little nook and cranny that we could. Neat.
Pretty neat.
Up and out the gorge we went, heading back to our camp at Stone Cliff, where we had absolutely worked up an appetite from our hikes for the day, so we got going on dinner right away next to the campfire with some beautiful West Virginia river views in the background. We just took it easy for the rest of the night, where we just relaxed by the campfire and read our books, digested our wonderful meals, and of course, listened to the sounds of the West Virginia night. Just prepare yourself for a lot of train noise if you're going to come camp this close to the river, because you'll be going to sleep with trains, and you'll be waking up with trains as well. Thank goodness that West Virginia alarm clock went off that early, because we were up and at 'em and had a great day for exploring. Today we are driving about 20 miles through these meandering scenic roads to the Babcock State Park, which is home to the Glade Creek Grist Mill. And this is an absolute beauty. It's the most photographed place in the whole state. It's just a beautiful replica mill made from parts of a couple different old mills that they put together. It still works. They have full running schematics, and you can go inside and see all the working parts. The wonderfully gorgeous Glade Creek runs adjacent to the mill, where you can see this waterfall. There's a bunch of hiking trails that run along the side into the woods that you can just keep following the water down. You can find plenty of ledges to sit and hang your feet over and take in the sights. But the true gem is just the beauty of this old mill, and it was awesome with all the fall colors in the background. It was gorgeous. And like I said, I do not often pass waterfalls. This rock looked like too good of a ledge to get a great photo opportunity. There are just so many of those places around in this state park. It was absolutely worth the drive through the scenic area and just the short stop on our day. After our quick detour here at Babcock State Park, we are heading back towards the new River Gorge for our next hike, which was going to be along the Endless Wall Trail. This hike was ready to offer some great stellar views of the gorge pretty much along the whole time. It's located right here on this Highway 82 in between Edmond and Lansing. There are 2 trailheads for this hike, so it does require about a half a mile walk on the road if you're going to do a round trip. This is a quite easy hike. It starts hiking along this little Fern Creek here that we just crossed on the bridge. There's a wonderful rhododendron forest here that would look spectacular in the spring when they're in full bloom. Starting from the Fern Creek trailhead, it's really just a short walk through the woods until you arrive at the star attraction of this hike, which is the Endless Wall, which offers stunning views of the gorge. Looking left here, you can see the Endless Wall that the hike kind of gets its name as it meanders along the top of that cliff along the gorge. And just looking down to the river and out to the other side down this canyon, it's just amazing. Absolutely stellar place to take in a view. But it does require some amount of caution on these cliffs, as some of them are huge. Continuing along down the trail, we attempted to take in every sight we could and stop at every vista that was available for us to see. Along the way, eventually we found this cool little ladder, which I couldn't help myself. I had to climb down and check it out. And I quickly ran into an angry group of climbers that were on their way up, and they didn't really have the patience for me down there gawking. But they were kind enough to let me snap a quick photo and climb out really quick. But we were on our way to the premier overlook on this trail, which is the Diamond Point Overlook. This was a really popular spot. There were actually quite a bunch of people out here, but with a view like this, it's really easy to see why. There were a bunch of nice people. We met and talked to a bunch of other travelers. There was a whole wedding party out there taking wedding pictures on that very rock that I was sitting at earlier. We just spent as much time as we could here looking down at the river, watching the trains go by, and spending every last second we could until the sun went down up on these cliffs. And then it's over our favorite bridge once again for yet another completely different, gorgeous view of the new River Gorge. And after our evening hike, we were heading to the Grandview sandbar located at the far south end of the park, where we had set up our tent way earlier that day. And with a quick night's sleep, we were ready to explore the Grandview area early in the morning. Here was a cool sign showing all of the interesting points at the Grandview, and here it is live in person, one of the most fantastic views in the entire gorge. We definitely took our time here and soaked in the views. There was even an eagle soaring through the gorge while we were here, and at one point it had come and it was flying below us, which gave us a really interesting perspective. So from the main overlook, we headed back on the Grandview walkways and then headed down the Castle Rock Trail, which is rated as a more strenuous trail And we were hiking out to the Turkey Spur overlook, which is just down a little ways from the main overlook at Grandview. But this trail offers some really cool up close views of these huge walls in this area. They were really cool to see and look at up close. You can just see how over time they've crumbled away into the gorge below, leaving these really cool patterned towering rock walls that we were hiking along. Another cool part about this section was that there's a coal seam running through right here, and this is the whole reason that people have come to this area for so long. Was this right here, the discovery of coal in these rocks. Continuing on down the Castle Rock Trail, the vistas remained stunning, and eventually we came across a little cave in the wall, which, I had to go sit in and take a picture. Just over a half a mile down the trail, you come to the Turkey Spur Overlook boardwalks, where you climb up some stairs, and there are two different observation decks that give you a view of each side of the Turkey Spur Overlook. The views here were stunning, but the tree cover here was also a little bit heavier than some of the previous overlooks that we had headed to, so I still wouldn't rank it as high as the main overlook at Grandview or the Diamond Point overlook, but this was still definitely worth the hike. At this time, we knew that this was also going to be our final overlook and some of our final views for the trip. So we soaked in our final sights of the coal trains going by and the river flowing by. We just took everything in for one last time before we hiked back to the car. And it was down off of the Turkey Spur for us. We were heading back to the parking lot where we passed some final park signage that we saw. We turned around and took our final glimpses of the river and this absolutely mighty gorge that it's carved out. We said goodbye to this, our national park, America's newest. We realized we were actually at the highest point in the whole park before leaving, which was pretty cool. And just like that, we were out of there, heading back home, north over the Ohio River.